All right, welcome back. Deadweight loss, taxation, consumer producer surplus, all here one video. Let's do it. All right, so deadweight loss refers to the decrease in total surplus resulting from the tax minus the tax revenue generated. So the idea is that there are mutually beneficial transactions that are not able to take place as a result of taxation. The way that we find the mutually beneficial transactions are we look at the demand curve and the supply curve. And as we talked about in previous videos, the demand curve represents the marginal benefit to consumers. So we could draw a demand curve and label it as MB. We could draw the supply curve and represent it or label it as MC, the marginal cost to consumers. And so if we look at point A, our initial point of equilibrium, what we see here is that up to point A, all units, the marginal benefit of producing that unit is greater than or equal to the marginal cost of producing that unit. And so all of those transactions should take place until we get to letter A. Once you get to A, if we continue to move to the right and go higher on the supply curve and lower on the demand curve, what we now see is that marginal cost is greater than marginal benefit. And so those transactions shouldn't take place, and they wouldn't take place in an efficient market. The problem here is that because of the taxation, it is creating this wedge of price, and so what we see is the price ends up being at B, reducing the quantity of the units sold. And so all the units sold from B to A or from C to A, these units are not sold because of the tax. So these are transactions for which the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost, and yet these units are not produced and are not consumed, and this is a deadweight loss. All right, so let's look at it here on this model. We're going to notice how the surplus changes. Consumer, producer, and total surplus all decrease as a result of a tax. So before the tax, we would operate in which producer surplus was D, E, and F, consumer was A, B, and C, total surplus was all of them, A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F, because we were producing the quantity without tax and the price without tax. That was the allocatively efficient quantity and price, because all units marginal benefit equal marginal cost. But we now have a tax which raises the price that buyers pay, and it lowers the price that sellers receive. So we have a decrease in both quantity supplied and quantity demanded. So we have the new lower quantity with the tax. So B and D represent the tax revenue that the government is going to raise, because those units are sold and that money goes to the government. But C and E represent the deadweight loss, that triangle there, because these are units that are no longer produced or consumed. They do not take place, even though they would be mutually beneficial. So now the new consumer surplus, again, it's the area below the demand curve and above the price. So the price buyers pay is up high, so it's only letter A. That's all that's left as consumer surplus. Producer surplus is the area above the supply curve and below the price received. Sellers only receive that lower price now, and so letter F represents the producer surplus. So total surplus is now just A and F, whereas before it was A, B, C, D, E, and F. So total surplus has dramatically decreased. All right, now an important thing I touched on in a previous video, kind of teased it. The size of the deadweight loss depends on the elasticity. When supply or demand is inelastic, the deadweight loss will be smaller, and you can see that with both models on the left, where we have an inelastic supply on top and then we have an inelastic demand on the bottom. However, when supply or demand is elastic, that means we have a large change in the behavior of the producer or consumers, the deadweight loss will be larger. This means that if governments want to have efficient taxation, they would do better to tax goods that have an inelastic supply and inelastic demand, because this will cause a smaller deadweight loss. All right, guys, until next time, this has been a La Money production.